I never thought I'd find myself sharing this kind of story, but here I am, pouring my heart out to strangers on the internet. Maybe it's the anonymity, or maybe it's just the desperate need to understand how everything went so wrong. Either way, I hope my story resonates with someone out there. It all started on what should have been a night of celebration. 12 years of marriage is no small feat, and I wanted to make sure our anniversary was special. I booked a table at this little bistro Katie loved, one we used to visit all the time when we were first married. The place had this cozy charm, a soft glow from the candlelight, the faint hum of jazz in the background, and a menu that always felt like a splurge. It was our spot, our little tradition. But even as I tried to focus on making the night perfect, something felt off. Katie was dressed to the nines, as always. She has this effortless way of making heads turn, but her energy was different. Her laughter felt lighter, like it was missing its usual warmth. She kept checking her phone too, just little glances here and there, but enough to catch my attention. I brushed it off at first. Maybe it was work, she'd been busy lately, and I didn't want to ruin the evening by overthinking. As the night went on, the feeling grew. You know that sense of unease you get when you just know something's wrong, even if you can't put your finger on it? That was me. Every glance at her phone chipped away at my patience. I tried to keep the conversation flowing, asking about her day, her plans, even cracking a few jokes. She responded, but her focus wasn't there. It was like she was physically present, but her mind was somewhere else entirely. Then it happened. Midway through dinner, her phone buzzed again, and she excused herself to take the call. She didn't even glance at me as she walked away, phone already pressed to her ear. I sat there, staring at the half-empty wine glass in front of me, feeling a strange mix of annoyance and curiosity. The minutes ticked by, and she still hadn't come back. That's when I noticed her purse, left carelessly on the chair. Now, I'm not proud of what I did next. In a perfect world, I would have waited for her to come back, asked her directly about what was going on. But this wasn't a perfect world, and I wasn't thinking clearly. My hands moved on their own as I reached for her purse. Inside, I spotted a phone I didn't recognize. Sleek, shiny, and definitely not the one she usually carried. My pulse quickened as I picked it up, feeling a mix of guilt and dread. I unlocked the phone using her code, the one I'd seen her use 100 times before. The screen lit up, and there it was. A message from someone named Brandon. Thinking about you. Can't wait for tomorrow. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I scrolled through the conversation, each message worse than the last. There were photos too, ones that left no room for doubt about the nature of their relationship. My mind raced. Brandon. Who was he? How long had this been going on? Was I imagining things, or had there been signs all along? My heart felt heavy, my chest tight. The restaurant, the dim light, the soft music, all of it blurred as I stared at the screen, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. I wanted to throw the phone across the room, to confront her right there and then. But instead, I put it back in her purse, my hands trembling ever so slightly. By the time Katie returned to the table, her face was calm, her smile easy. "Sorry about that," she said, slipping her phone back into her purse as if nothing had happened. I watched her, studying every detail of her face, her movements, searching for any hint of guilt or remorse. She didn't notice my expression, too busy pouring herself another glass of wine. It took everything in me to keep my composure, to play along for the rest of the dinner. That was the moment I realized everything had changed. Whatever trust, whatever bond we had built over the past 12 years, had been shaken to its core. And yet, part of me held back, not wanting to jump to conclusions without giving her a chance to explain. I knew I couldn't let this go. I just didn't know how or when to bring it up without turning our entire world upside down. By the time we left the restaurant, the weight of what I'd discovered felt unbearable. The drive home was silent, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Katie didn't seem to notice, or if she did, she didn't say anything. I kept my hands steady on the wheel, my mind racing with questions, doubts, and an anger that I could feel building deep inside. I didn't have all the answers yet, but one thing was clear. The life we had built together was about to change forever. The drive home from the restaurant felt like a slow march toward an inevitable confrontation. Katie sat beside me, scrolling through her main phone as though nothing had happened, completely unaware that her secret was no longer safe. The tension in the car was suffocating, broken only by the soft hum of the engine and the occasional tap of her fingers against the screen. My mind was racing, replaying everything I had read on that hidden phone, every damning word, every photo that spoke volumes about the double life she had been living. I kept my composure. There was no way I was going to let anger take over and cloud my judgment. I needed answers, and I wasn't about to let her wiggle out of this. When we pulled into the driveway, I turned off the car and sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel. Katie finally looked up from her phone, confused by my silence. "Is everything okay?" she asked, her voice tinged with mild concern, though not enough to make me believe she actually cared. I let the question hang in the air before responding, my voice low but firm. "Who's Brandon?" Her expression shifted instantly. First, confusion, then a flicker of panic. She tried to mask it with a casual laugh. "What are you talking about?" I met her gaze, unwavering. "Don't play dumb, Katie. I saw the messages. On the other phone. The one you left in your purse." Her face went pale. She opened her mouth to say something, but no words came out. For a moment, she looked like a deer caught in headlights. Then, just as quickly, her demeanor shifted to defensive. "I don't know what you think you saw, but it's not what it looks like," she said, her voice sharp now, laced with indignation. I raised an eyebrow, my tone calm but cutting. "Not what it looks like. Because it looks like you've been sleeping with your trainer for the past year. Am I wrong?" She froze again, this time unable to find a comeback. The silence stretched between us, heavy and damning. Finally, she let out a shaky breath and muttered, "It wasn't supposed to happen." "That's not an answer," I shot back. "How long, Katie? How long have you been lying to me?" Her shoulders slumped, and she looked down at her hands, now nervously twisting the strap of her purse. "It started last year," she admitted. "At the gym. He was just easy to talk to, you know? You've been so distant lately, and I felt invisible." "Invisible," I repeated, the word dripping with disdain. "So instead of talking to me, you decided to screw someone else? That's your solution?" Tears welled up in her eyes, but they didn't move me. I had seen her cry before, and I knew the difference between genuine remorse and manipulative theatrics. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she whispered. "I was lonely. And he made me feel wanted." I stared at her, barely able to believe what I was hearing. "So, this is my fault now. Because I didn't shower you with attention 24/7, you thought it was okay to betray me? To betray our marriage?" She shook her head, the tears now streaming down her face. "No, it's not your fault. I know that. I made a mistake. A terrible mistake. But I love you, and I want to fix this." I couldn't help but laugh, a bitter, humorless sound. "Fix this?" "Katie, you didn't just trip and fall into an affair. This wasn't a one-time lapse in judgment. This was a choice you made over and over again, for an entire year. Do you even understand what you've done?" She reached out to touch my hand, but I pulled away. Her touch, once familiar and comforting, now felt like a violation. "Please, let's talk about this," she pleaded. "We can work through it. I'll end things with Brandon. I'll do whatever it takes." I shook my head, my resolve hardening with every passing second. "There's nothing to work through, Katie. You killed this marriage the moment you decided to lie to me. The moment you decided he was more important than the vows we made." Her sobs grew louder, but I didn't waver. I got out of the car and walked into the house, leaving her there to grapple with the weight of her choices. I knew this was far from over, but for now, I needed space. Space to think, to process, and to figure out how to move forward from the wreckage she had created. The hours after that confrontation felt like an eternity. I sat in the living room, staring at the walls that had witnessed so much of our life together. Family dinners, movie nights, quiet mornings with coffee. Everything in the house seemed unchanged, yet I knew nothing would ever feel the same. The betrayal hung in the air like a heavy fog, suffocating and inescapable. Katie eventually came inside, her face red and blotchy from crying. She tried to speak to me again, but I held up a hand to stop her. "Not tonight," I said firmly. "I need time to think." That was the truth. I needed space to process what had happened. But what I didn't say was that I also needed to be alone, because every time I looked at her, I saw the messages, the photos, the lies. I felt like I didn't even know the woman standing in front of me. Over the next few days, I went through a whirlwind of emotions. At first, there was the anger, raw and unrelenting. I replayed our conversation over and over in my head, each word she said fueling the fire inside me. How dare she blame her actions on feeling invisible? How dare she act like her loneliness justified destroying the trust we'd built over 12 years? I punched a wall in the garage one night, just to release some of that rage. It didn't help. The hole in the drywall only served as a stark reminder of the damage done, both to the house and to our marriage. But anger couldn't sustain itself forever. Once it burned out, it left behind something even harder to deal with: sadness. I started to grieve, not just for the betrayal, but for the life I thought we had. I looked back on old photos of us, smiling on vacations, at friends' weddings, holding hands on a walk. I thought about the good times, the laughter, the love. Was any of it real? Had she been lying to me all along, or was there a point when we were genuinely happy? The uncertainty of it all was maddening. I tried to find answers in the details, combing through memories with a fine-tooth comb. The late nights at work, the gym sessions that ran long, the sudden bursts of affection when she'd come home after seeing him. How did I not notice? The signs had been there, but I had ignored them. Whether out of trust, complacency, or sheer naivety, I had let myself believe in an illusion. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. I spent countless nights lying awake, staring at the ceiling, consumed by what-ifs. What if I'd paid more attention? What if I'd been more affectionate? What if I'd confronted her sooner? The self-blame crept in, uninvited and persistent, despite my better judgment. I knew rationally that her choices were her own. But emotionally, that was a harder battle to win. Eventually, the sadness gave way to something I hadn't expected: clarity. It came in small moments, like when I sat on the back porch with a beer, watching the sunset, and realized I didn't feel the need to check if Katie would join me. Or when I ran into an old friend at the hardware store, and he asked how I was doing. I didn't sugarcoat it. "Not great," I said honestly. But just saying it aloud felt like the first step toward acceptance. The more I reflected, the more I saw Katie's betrayal for what it was: a reflection of her, not me. She wasn't unfaithful because I was a bad husband or because I had failed her in some way. She was unfaithful because she made a selfish, destructive choice. A choice that had nothing to do with me and everything to do with her own insecurities. That realization didn't erase the pain, but it gave me something I desperately needed: control. I couldn't change what she had done, but I could control how I responded. I could decide what kind of man I wanted to be moving forward: one who let this betrayal define him, or one who rose above it. I chose the latter. Clarity came with a cold, unrelenting finality. Once the anger had subsided and the sadness had run its course, I was left with one undeniable truth: trust, once broken, could not be repaired. Katie's betrayal had shattered something fundamental, something no apology, promise, or grand gesture could ever piece back together. Staying together would have meant living in constant doubt, second-guessing every text, every excuse, every late night. That wasn't the kind of life I was willing to endure. I spent days wrestling with the decision, not because I was unsure of what needed to be done, but because the weight of finality is heavier than anyone tells you. About a week after the confrontation, I picked up the phone and called a lawyer. It was a quiet, methodical step. I didn't tell Katie immediately. I needed time to get my affairs in order first. It wasn't an impulsive decision, nor was it made out of anger or spite. It was calculated, deliberate, and, above all, necessary. I was done living in limbo, caught between anger and heartbreak. If our marriage was a bridge, Katie had burned it to the ground. There was no point in trying to walk across the ashes, no future in pretending the foundation hadn't already crumbled. When I finally sat her down to tell her, she seemed to know what was coming. Maybe it was the way I'd stopped engaging in our usual routines, or maybe it was the quiet resolve in my demeanor. Either way, she looked nervous but resigned, as if bracing herself for the inevitable. "This isn't about punishing you," I began, my voice steady but firm. "This is about respecting myself enough to walk away from a situation that no longer serves me. You made your choices, Katie. Now I'm making mine." Her reaction was a roller coaster of emotions. At first, there were tears, desperate, gut-wrenching sobs that filled the silence between us. She begged me to reconsider, swearing she'd cut off all contact with Brandon and anyone else who might threaten our relationship. She promised she'd go to therapy, that she'd do whatever it takes to fix things. But her words felt hollow. They weren't rooted in genuine remorse or love. They were born out of fear. Fear of the consequences, fear of being alone, fear of facing the fallout of her actions. I could see it in her eyes. She wasn't fighting for us. She was fighting against the reality of losing the life she'd taken for granted. When her pleas failed to sway me, she turned to anger. "You're giving up too easily," she said, her voice rising with frustration. "Marriage is supposed to be about forgiveness. Don't you believe in second chances?" I looked her in the eye, unwavering. "Forgiveness and trust aren't the same thing, Katie. I can forgive you, but I'll never trust you again. And without trust, there's no foundation for a marriage." She recoiled at the firmness in my tone, as though she hadn't expected me to stand my ground. But what she didn't understand, what she couldn't understand, was that I wasn't trying to hurt her. I was protecting myself. The papers were filed the next day. The process moved quickly. Too quickly for her, but just fast enough for me. We lived in a small community, and word spread faster than I anticipated. Katie's reputation took a hit, especially once people learned the details of her affair with Brandon. She lost clients at her fitness studio, and Brandon wasn't spared either. His wife made sure their social circle knew exactly what had happened. But I didn't spend much time worrying about how they were handling the fallout. My focus was on rebuilding my life. I started going to therapy, not because I felt broken, but because I wanted to process everything in a healthy way. Talking to someone who didn't know me or Katie was a relief. It gave me the space to untangle the mess of emotions I'd been carrying: anger, sadness, guilt, and even relief. Therapy reminded me of something I'd forgotten. It was okay to feel hurt, angry, and relieved all at once. It was okay to grieve the loss of a marriage while also feeling liberated from its constraints. I reconnected with old friends, people I'd lost touch with during the years I'd been so focused on my relationship. Their support was like a lifeline, grounding me when I felt adrift. Some of them had been through divorces themselves, and their advice was invaluable. They didn't tell me to move on or just get over it. Instead, they told me to take my time, to let myself heal, to focus on what I needed. Slowly but surely, I started rediscovering the parts of myself I'd neglected. I took up hiking again, finding solace in the quiet beauty of the trails. I dusted off my woodworking tools and started building furniture, a hobby that had always brought me peace. I even picked up photography, capturing moments that reminded me the world was still full of beauty, even when life felt chaotic. The journey wasn't linear. There were nights when I lay awake, replaying the confrontation in my head, wondering if I could have done something differently. But each time those thoughts crept in, I reminded myself of the truth. Katie's betrayal wasn't my failure. Her choices weren't my responsibility. Looking back now, I realize her actions don't define me. Yes, they hurt. Yes, they broke something in me that may never fully heal. But they also taught me lessons I'll carry with me for the rest of my life. I learned that boundaries matter, that self-respect is non-negotiable, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away. To anyone reading this, my advice is simple. Don't let fear hold you back. Fear of being alone, fear of starting over, fear of what people will say. None of that is worth staying in a relationship that has lost its foundation. You deserve to be with someone who values you, respects you, and honors the commitments they make. If you were in my shoes, what would you have done? Would you fight to save the marriage, or would you choose to walk away? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Your perspective might just help someone else who's struggling with the same decision. It's been several months since the divorce was finalized, and life has taken on a rhythm I never expected. The first few weeks were a blur of emotions: grief, anger, and a strange sense of relief all swirling together. Adjusting to the silence of a home that had once been filled with shared routines, casual conversations, and inside jokes was harder than I anticipated. The emptiness felt deafening at times, like an echo of everything I'd lost. But slowly, I began to see the quiet differently. It wasn't a void, it was a blank canvas. The absence of chaos and mistrust became an opportunity to rediscover who I was, stripped of the roles I'd played as a husband and partner. I wasn't just starting over, I was rebuilding, piece by piece, with a clarity and purpose I hadn't felt in years. At first, I kept myself busy. The structure of my daily life became my anchor. I poured energy into my work, not as an escape but as a way to create something meaningful. I set new goals, both professionally and personally, and I threw myself into achieving them. I stayed late at the office when inspiration struck, took on challenging projects that pushed my skills to the limit, and found a sense of pride in every milestone I reached. With each small success, I felt the weight of betrayal lifting. It wasn't dramatic. There was no sudden epiphany or magical moment of closure. It was gradual, like layers of fog peeling away to reveal a clearer horizon. Outside of work, I took steps to reconnect with parts of myself I'd let slip away. I picked up old hobbies, like woodworking and hiking, that had always brought me peace. I explored new interests too, taking a photography class and joining a local book club. For the first time in a long time, I was doing things purely for myself, and it felt liberating. Friends and family were a lifeline during this time. They showed up for me in ways that didn't feel intrusive or overwhelming. I made it clear early on that I didn't want pity. I wasn't a victim, and I didn't need constant reminders of my pain. What I craved was normalcy, and they respected that. They invited me to dinner, included me in group outings, and talked about things unrelated to my divorce. That simple act of treating me like myself, rather than someone broken, made all the difference. One of the most unexpected blessings in this journey was the connections I made with others who had faced similar challenges. Online forums and local meetups introduced me to people with their own stories of betrayal, heartbreak, and resilience. Hearing their experiences gave me a sense of perspective and community. Some had endured far worse than I had, yet they'd found a way to move forward. It was a powerful reminder that healing isn't linear. It's a messy, unpredictable process, but it's possible if you take it one step at a time. As I've reflected on everything that happened, I've come to realize just how much this experience has reshaped my understanding of relationships and trust. One of the biggest lessons I've learned is that effort alone isn't enough. Both people in a partnership need to show up fully, with honesty, accountability, and the willingness to grow together. It's not enough to say the right words or go through the motions. Real love is a daily choice, an active commitment to prioritizing each other's needs and well-being. I've also learned the value of boundaries, not just in relationships but in every aspect of life. Looking back, I can see there were moments in my marriage when I ignored signs that something wasn't right. Small lies, unexplained absences, and subtle shifts in behavior. Each one should have been a signal to dig deeper, but I brushed them off. I trusted Katie because I wanted to believe in the strength of our bond. But trust isn't an excuse to ignore red flags. A healthy relationship requires both trust and vigilance, a balance I'll carry into any future partnership. Perhaps the most important lesson of all is that betrayal doesn't have to define your future. It's tempting to let anger and bitterness take over, to let someone else's actions shape how you see yourself and the world. But holding on to that anger only prolongs the pain. Forgiveness doesn't mean excusing what happened or reconciling with the person who hurt you. It means releasing yourself from the grip of the past, letting go of the resentment that keeps you tied to something you can't change. Today, my life feels lighter, freer. I'm not rushing to fill the void with a new relationship or a flurry of distractions. Instead, I'm embracing the simplicity of standing on solid ground, unburdened by someone else's choices. The scars of Katie's betrayal remain, but they're just that, scars. They tell a story, but they don't define me. If anything, they've made me stronger, more self-assured, and more determined to live authentically. I'm not naive enough to think the pain will disappear entirely. There are still moments when memories creep in, uninvited. But they no longer have the power to derail me. They're reminders of where I've been, not where I'm going. Looking ahead, I feel hopeful. When the time comes to open my heart again, I'll do so with a clearer sense of what I need and deserve. I won't settle for less than honesty, respect, and partnership. And until that day comes, I'm content with the life I'm building for myself. A life rooted in authenticity, purpose, and a deep appreciation for the lessons I've learned. To anyone who has faced betrayal or heartbreak, I want you to know this. You are stronger than you think. The road to healing isn't easy, but it's worth every step. Surround yourself with people who lift you up. Pursue the things that bring you joy, and never lose sight of your worth. If you've been through something similar, how did you find the strength to move forward? What helped you heal, and what advice would you give to someone in the middle of their own journey? Your perspective could be the encouragement someone else needs to take their first step toward healing. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments.